Awesome. Are you ready?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We are super excited. So let us just introduce ourselves. I'm Maddie. I use they, them pronouns.
I'm Rowan. I also use they, them pronouns.
And we are here to provide you with Virtual Pronouns 101. This is through the Pronoun Education Project through Northeast Iowa Peace and Justice Center. Shout out to Charlene Bohr, who is the executive director there, and she's been a huge support in this entire process and especially getting this event put together. So make sure you check Peace and Justice Center out on Facebook and their websites. They're doing amazing work, and we are super happy to have their support throughout this process. So some reminders before we get started. Unfortunately, closed captioning is not available live, but it will be available in the recording afterward. So we hope that, since many people register, we'll be able to send you the recording after the event. In order to continue the conversation on how we can make this event more inclusive, please contact info@neipjc.org to help us out with that. Also, just as a courtesy, just please keep yourself muted throughout the workshop and webinar. It'll kind of help keep things easier. As you know, when you came into the event, you were reminded that the presentation is going to be recorded all the way through. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, which we highly encourage, we would love it if you typed up your question in the chat. And we have volunteers that are keeping track of all the questions and compiling them all onto one document, and then they will be read at the very end for Q&A, which we hope to save the last 30 minutes for. I know at our first event at Decorah Public Library that we were able to do before quarantine, we were able to kind of have a discussion-based chat as we presented, but unfortunately we're going to try to keep it a little more organized now and just read them from the chat. And then one really important thing to remember is that hateful and disrespectful behavior will not be tolerated in this space. So if it happens, the person or people will be removed from the workshop, or we might just have to end the Zoom call altogether if things get too disruptive. But I trust that everything will be okay. So another reminder that we are raising money of the Marsha P. Johnston Institute. So 80% of free will donations are going to support this nonprofit. And the mission statement is up there on the slide. But I also wanted to read a little bit to y'all about Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha P. Johnson was an activist, self-identified drag queen, performer, and survivor. She was a prominent figure in the Stonewall Uprising of 1969, which, if you didn't know, today is the 51st anniversary of the Stonewall Uprisings. We planned that. So Marsha went by Black Marsha before settling on Marsha P. Johnson. The P stood for Pay It No Mind, which is what Marsha would say in response to questions about her gender. It is the consideration of who Black Marsha was that inspired the Marsha P. Johnson Institute. So while we're on this slide too, I also just wanted to plug a documentary on Netflix called The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson. It kind of goes through, obviously, her life work as a trans activist and leader, but also, like for many other trans lives, her death is kind of unknown as far as how it happened. When she was found in New York, police kind of just assumed it was suicide, which happens a lot for trans people, but a lot of her friends and family believe that's not true, and we're worried that, she might have been murdered. So this Netflix documentary, The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson, kind of just talks about the most recent reopening of her case for that and trying to find out, if and who killed her. Yeah.
Say their names. So these are the names of every trans person we know so far who has been killed in 2020. All of these people were murdered. I will speak their names is in solidarity of their life and death, but please be aware that some of them are Hispanic and they are hard for me to pronounce because I am a non-native Spanish speaker. Dustin Parker, Alexa Negron Luciano, Yampi Mendez Arocho, Monica Diamond, Lexi, Johanna Metzger, Serena Angelique Velasquez, Leila Pelaez Sanchez, Penelope Diaz Ramirez, Nina Pop, Hele Ye O'Regan, Tony McDade, Dominique Remy Fells, Rhea Milton, Jane Thompson.
Awesome. Thanks, Rowan. Also, before I forget to, Charlene will be sharing or has shared the link to donate to the Marsha P. Johnson Institute in the chat. So if you haven't had the chance to donate yet, you can check that out as well. So it's very important that we also acknowledge the land that the stolen land that we are on before kind of digging into the meat of this presentation. So I shared some resources there on the slide that you can see. native-land.ca is a great map resource to use. You can basically just look up the city or town that you're in, and it'll kind of give a brief, synopsis of the stolen land that you're on based on the tribes that have lived there previously. And then also the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture has an Honor Native Land initiative to try to encourage people to, honor and acknowledge the native land that we're on before public and private events. So the land acknowledgement, just to be clear, that I'm going to share right now is pertaining to the area that Rowan and I are in right now, which is in Decorah, Iowa. So we really encourage you to look at these resources and find out, what land you are on. So this land acknowledgement has been shared around the Decorah community. I personally got it from Holly Moore, who had it shared by David Faldit. We acknowledge that the land was home to the Iowa, Sac, Fox, Dakota, Winnebago, and Ho-Chunk people, whose relationship to this land continues today. We acknowledge that the Ho-Chunk moved here from Wisconsin against their will, and in less than a generation, pressure from the U.S. government and immigrant settlers forced them to relocate again. We acknowledge that this land, once called the neutral ground, was created by the U.S. government to control the movement, lives, and livelihood of Native peoples. We acknowledge that the history of this area is directly tied to the dispossession of the Sac, Fox, and Dakota, and the forced migration of the Ho-Chunk people.
So we say all these spaces are safe spaces, and they are. But this space, we also want to be a brave space. A space where you can feel brave enough to ask questions you're normally worried will sound offensive or intrusive. Now, mistakes happen, and sometimes questions can be worded poorly, most often unintentionally. If that happens, we're here to let you know and to educate you. That's why you're here, and that's why we're all here, to learn.
Yeah, we're all here to learn. We're all gonna mess up. Those are super important things to remember. And Rowan and I aren't experts. We are providing this information and education based off of some research we've done and based off of some of our own personal experiences, which even between the two of us, our personal experiences as non-binary and trans people in this world are very different.
And somewhat limited, as we are both white people.
Yes.
And we will touch on that.
Exactly. So another good point, Rowan. Yeah, we cannot speak to Black, Indigenous, people of color experiences. We can only speak to our own. I think it's also just important to mention too that, the LGBT community isn't always super inclusive either. A lot of communities are constantly left out. So this is kind of just encouraging you to think intersectionally and notice intersecting identities that may come into play throughout this presentation and just in daily life. So before we even get into pronouns and stuff, we need to get back to the basics. So we kind of need to differentiate some different things, and Rowan's kind of gonna go through a little activity with y'all.
This is called the genderbread person. It represents different parts of gender identity. So here, I'll start with biological sex, which is what people most often cite in remarks, usually transphobic ones. Biological sex is based on genitalia and reproductive organs, the ones you were born with. However, contrary to popular belief, biological sex is not binary. There are actually 6 or 7 sexes. The 4 or 5 that aren't male or female are variations of what is commonly known as intersex. The chromosomes of these sexes are not restricted to just XX and XY. They also have X, XXX, XXY, and many other combinations. It's also worth noting that chromosomes are not the only factor in determining biological sex, as the gene called SRY plays a part as well as many other factors. As a result, someone with XX chromosomes can have male gonads, or XY individuals can have ovaries. Now, the next 2 topics, gender identity and sexual orientation, often get confused. Examples of sexual orientation are bisexual, homosexual, pansexual, or asexual. Feel free to jump in with more examples. And examples of gender identity include transgender, genderqueer, agender, or non-binary. So gender identity is separate from biological sex. It's in your brain. It's not in your pants, no matter what people tell me. Trans woman and trans man and non-binary are all gender identities, and they all fit under the transgender umbrella. That means they identify with a gender that doesn't match their biological sex. Sexual orientation, on the other hand, is who you're attracted to. There are a lot of different labels for different orientations because some people are only attracted to certain biological sexes and some don't have a preference. This also becomes a bit more complex when it comes to non-binary and transgender identities because biological sex often plays a part. For example, a homosexual man is only sexually attracted to people with male genitalia, but may be romantically attracted to a pre-operation trans man. Or a woman may identify herself as lesbian, but she is willing to become involved with an AFAB non-binary person. And for those who don't know, AFAB means assigned female at birth, and AMAB, AMAB means assigned male at birth. I may use those terms further in the presentation. It means I'm referring to what they were assigned as at birth. Expression, that's the last one. Expression is how you express your identity. If a non-binary person who is assigned female at birth chooses to dress masculine, that means they are expressing themselves in a masculine or androgynous way. Now, bear in mind, expression has no bearing on gender identity. If a cisgender man dresses feminine, it does not mean he is a transgender female or non-binary or homosexual or bisexual. It's completely unrelated.
Awesome. Thank you. Just quick reminder, if you got questions, throw them in the chat. We will get to them. So, what are personal pronouns? So personal pronouns are the pronouns referring to the unique and individual person that you are. It's important to remember that they, she, and he are not the only options. We have it in our nice little photo that we were using to advertise for this event, but these are just a couple options. I know that Minus 18, which is an organization in Australia, they have a pronouns app with a list of 6 more types of pronouns. So it's important to just let y'all know that so you aren't surprised later. It's also important to avoid saying preferred pronouns when you're asking people for their pronouns. I usually just recommend that people say, you know, personal pronouns or just what are your pronouns. Saying preferred in front of pronouns can make it seem like a choice instead of an identity. And our pronouns and our gender are our identities, and that's who we are. So we don't want people to feel like they're choosing that. Another thing to note too is that pronouns need to be optional. So by this, I kind of just mean if you're asking, you know, a large group of people to share their pronouns, or you're asking one person what their pronouns are and they don't feel comfortable telling you, or they just decide not to tell you, it's important to respect that, because there are times when people are in places where they don't know what their pronouns are, or maybe they're in the process of questioning their gender identity and they just don't know what pronouns feel best for them. And there are also times where people don't identify with no pronouns and they just want you to use their name. It's also just important to know that they're optional, or to be aware of them in spaces when, you know, for example, like if somebody isn't out in certain groups or communities, it's important to know, you know, what their pronouns are in different spaces. Somebody might be out to their coworkers and they can use their true pronouns there, but they might not be out to their family members. So it's important to ask somebody when they tell you their pronouns, just asking them and being mindful of, okay, where can I use these for you? Is it okay if I say these in front of your family? And stuff like that. Just important to be mindful.
History. Fun. So, the history of non-binary genders dates all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia. I won't go super into detail, don't worry. So there are Sumerian, Akkadian, and ancient Egyptian tablets describing people who don't fit into the roles of male and female. Even in modern times, non-binary identities exist rather commonly outside of the Western world. The two most notable examples include the Mahu in Hawaiian and Tahitian cultures, and the Two-Spirit in Native American culture. Now, if we're talking about the history of pronouns, specifically they, them, it actually existed in the Western world as a gender-neutral pronoun prior to 1745. However, at that time, linguists claimed that they, them was no longer valid. Their reasoning was that since it didn't exist singularly in Latin, which they viewed as the superior language, it shouldn't exist in English. This was officially followed in scientific writings, but it wasn't followed subconsciously. People still use it sometimes. So the example that I like to give when people bring up the issue of it being grammatically incorrect is that if you find a wallet on the ground and you don't know the gender of who it belongs to, you automatically say, we should give this to the police. They'll be wanting their wallet back. People use it all the time. However, in 2019, the Modern Language Association, known as MLA, overturned that rule and stated that they, them can be used singularly in academic and scientific writings. So being PC is now grammatically correct.
Yay!
And in honor of Pride Month, granted, the end of it, and the Black Lives Matter movement, I'll also give a quick history of Pride Month and mention the role that a Black trans woman played in it. On June 28, 1969, the police attempted to raid on the Stonewall Inn, a gay club in New York City. Officers roughed up patrons and would even take suspected cross-dressers into the bathroom to check their sex. Patrons refused to disperse, and tensions came to a breaking point when a lesbian was hit over the head while being dragged into a van. Marsha P. Johnson, who was mentioned earlier, a Black transgender or drag queen, threw a brick at police officers alongside many other angry patrons. Within minutes, hundreds of people rose up in protest, and although they were eventually dispersed, riots continued in the area for 6 days, sometimes involving thousands of people. On the one-year anniversary of the riots, thousands of people marched from Stonewall Inn to Central Park, and this became known as America's first Pride Parade. Just a quick history, you can check out more on history.com. There's a link at the end if you want to go more in depth into the history.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, it's like important too, because these were the Stonewall riots, and now there's such a connection to today and connection to police brutality, because the LGBT community has been experiencing police brutality as well. And just, it's really important to be aware of that and the intersections of that in order to continue the fight for racial justice, and also continue the fight for justice for the trans lives that have been lost as well. So why are they important? We have grown up just assuming people's pronouns and their gender identity based on how they look and how they sound. And this can actually end up being very harmful because just assuming in general is pretty harmful, right? So, but assuming who somebody is like that added harm as well. And so when you're assuming their gender, you might misgender them, which for those of you who don't know, misgender means to use the wrong pronouns for somebody or assume somebody as the wrong gender. So when you misgender them, you're disrespecting them as a person and not acknowledging who they are.
Can also be a blow to self-esteem for a lot of people.
Yes, thank you. It's also important to know that using someone's correct personal pronouns are just as important as using someone's name. So now I kind of invite you, if you're a cisgender person, and cisgendered means your biological sex aligns with your gender, how would you feel if somebody used the wrong pronouns for you? And maybe it happens to like everybody at least once, depending on how we dressed one day. But what if it happened like 10 times throughout one day?
And what if people refuse to call you by the right pronouns, even when you asked?
Yeah. Just trying to sit with that a little bit, because I know some people trying to find other comparisons to it of like, oh, I would hate if somebody used the wrong name for me, which that's important too. But, even just like think about it. How would you feel if someone used the wrong pronouns for you? And maybe you think, oh, maybe it wouldn't bother you that much, but I have a feeling that if it actually did start happening to you, it really would. And you might get really frustrated. And you might get really frustrated of feeling like you have to correct people all the time.
What do I do? What to do? If you use the wrong pronouns for someone, not something. This is a thing that comes up a lot for a lot of people because it happens. Mistakes happen. Don't freak out. Don't make a big deal about it. Don't say, I'm sorry, I just knew you before. It's going to take me a while. I'm just not used to it. It makes us feel like a burden. And it's uncomfortable to be constantly reminded that it doesn't feel normal for others. If you misgender someone and catch yourself, just correct yourself and move on. For example, if you were introducing your friend and misgendered them, you could say, oh, and they go to college in the area. Don't make a fuss, it's not a big deal. Now the same goes if the person corrects you. For example, if someone called me a she, I would personally let the first one go to give them a chance to correct themselves. But if it continued, I would just say a simple they to remind them of my pronouns without putting them on the spot. Now, if you were to turn around and say one of the excuses I mentioned before, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm just not used to it, or this is so hard, it's going to take me a while, I'm trying, then my attempts at subtlety are kind of out the window. And now you're putting me on the spot and making me feel like I'm a burden or abnormal, which is the opposite of what I want my pronouns to be. I know you're sorry, and I know you're trying, but actions speak louder than words.
You said it. Yeah, it's really important to get them right, and it's so hard. And I think it might take people practice too to work on not saying those initial reactions of like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not used to this, or oh, like making it such a big deal. But like, yeah, then just think about that and maybe take time to say it out loud of just practicing it, because it is really hard when people are making it a big deal and then putting it on the person that's being misgendered, because it's not the person that's being misgendered. It's not really their job to correct you all the time. You have to hold yourself accountable. So other ways you can find to do that with either other friends or family members or coworkers or whatever, that's a good thing to do as well. So usually when we did this event in person, we would have you turn to the person you're sitting next to and and like practice. But we're gonna like make it virtual style because we're cool like that. So we're savvy. So with that, I put a little screenshot This was the only screenshot I could find. So don't pay attention to the red arrows in the screenshot of the Zoom call, because I just wanted to show you what your little screen would like, because we wanted to invite you to add your pronouns to your Zoom name. So if you go to your little square and you see your little square, you can see there's a mute button, and there's also a blue box with 3 little dots. And so if you click that blue box, a little drop down will come down, and the second option down will say rename, and that's where you can edit your name. So sometimes what I do is I just like leave my first name in there, so then I have room for people to see my pronouns, because sometimes Zoom kind of cuts it off with the ellipses. So yeah, you can add your pronouns in there, and then you have the little checkbox option to save that name for future Zoom meetings. So then you'll have it saved and good to go for the rest of your virtual little life. So yeah. There you go. So I invite you to do that while I kind of go through the rest of the information on this slide. If people are having trouble doing that, we can maybe address that during the Q&A, or my Q&A people, if anybody's saying anything in the chat, just holler in and let me know if people have questions. So also just important to know, well, on the slide, there's examples of how you can practice, how you can incorporate it into your daily life. So I'll just use myself. My name is Maddie. My pronouns are they, them. Some examples of how to ask it. May I ask what pronouns you use? Or what are your pronouns? So these are good examples, but I feel like for the most part, if I'm introducing myself to somebody first, I usually will do my best to remember to share my pronouns. And then that kind of already unintentionally invites the other person to share theirs if they know what pronouns are and what their pronouns are. So I find that super helpful there. Yeah, awesome. But it's just really important to try to get in the habit of sharing your pronouns, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit.
How can we support our trans and non-binary communities? So a few ways that you can do this are share your own pronouns. Normalizing asking for or sharing pronouns is a great way to make trans and non-binary colleagues feel more comfortable to start. Share your pronouns in your email signature, on your name tags, websites, and social media. And use inclusive language. Instead of saying both genders, say all genders. Or instead of saying he or she, he/she, especially in writing, say they. It's now grammatically correct.
Yeah.
Correct others if they mess up someone's pronouns. Practice, as Maddie said on the last slide. And donate to organizations if you can that support trans and GNC people. We have some organizations you can donate to in the presentation.
Yeah, we'll go over those in a bit too. I just wanted to add as well, with the social media, I kind of wanted to give you some specifics of places that you can add your pronouns. So I know on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, in that little bio that you can have under your name, you can add your pronouns there. Also, I tried adding my pronouns to my LinkedIn, which there wasn't really a spot for it, but I just put it next to my last name and saved it. And your resumes, while we're talking about professional development, you can add them to your resumes and maybe people will ask about them and you can have a super amazing conversation. Yeah, also important to know too with like, if you're meeting someone who's, if you're meeting someone or you have a close friend that is using different pronouns than maybe they were previously, just be patient with yourself and know that it can take, like, I looked it up, like 66 days to change a habit. So if you've known someone your whole life with one set of pronouns, be a little gracious with yourself, but also try to push yourself. I'm gonna shout out to my family as an example. They all have known me my whole life using she, her pronouns, and I've been using they, them pronouns now for a little over a year probably. And yeah, they still mess up a little bit here and there, but they all kind of help correct each other. I still correct them sometimes when I feel comfortable doing that, and but they're all able to do it, and that includes my parents. So also, if you want to use the excuse of like being an older person that maybe just like wasn't exposed to this as much, you know, I've met like other 40 and 50-year-olds that learned my pronouns in a week. So it really just kind of depends on how much time you're kind of putting into practice and how much you're thinking about it. Oh, also, before I forget, I wanted to plug the, oh wait, I'm gonna plug that later. Never mind. Sorry. Ooh. So, like Rowan said, we wanted to share some other organizations with you that to support. Obviously, in the beginning, we shared with you about the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, which is what this webinar is fundraising for. 80% of the donations are going to that organization. But that's not the only organization out there that's supporting transgender lives. So here's a list of a few others. Sylvia Rivera Law Project. For those of you who don't know, Sylvia Rivera was a Latina trans woman who was pretty good friends with Marsha, and they worked together and they were activists, trans activists together. Also, there's the Okra Project, Trans Women of Color Collective, Insight, and the Black Trans Travel Fund. So these are just a few. These are not the only ones. There are tons out there. It was stressful trying to like get it down to a few that we could share with y'all. But it's important to know that all of these organizations, including the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, they're all on social media. So you can follow them on Facebook, Instagram, I'm pretty sure Twitter too. But if you know other organizations off the top of your head and want to share them, just put them in the chat so we can share the info with everybody. You can share some links there too if you want, because we definitely missed a lot, because there's a lot of organizations out there.
Here are just some resources, some websites and articles that you can educate yourself if you want to look further into different pronouns, different identities. mypronouns.org, that's a great one. -18, Maddie mentioned that earlier. Transgender Resources by GLAAD, GLAD, they're a great proponent. Straight for Equality, Trans Ally Resources. And here's some videos on the side if you're interested. What are gender pronouns by Bloom, and what are pronouns by -18 again.
Awesome. Yeah, so feel free if you want to take a picture of this slide with your phone to Google these later. Specifically with the -18 pronouns app, I really like it because, like I said before, it's the app that has, like, you know, it quizzes you on she, her, hers, he, him, his, they, them, theirs, but it also has 6 other types of pronouns that you can practice and learn about. And it's really cool because it breaks it down into all the different types and ways that you would use it. And then you can kind of like take a little quiz, and like it's kind of like a little game, and then once you get 100% you can move on to the next set of pronouns. So it's something kind of just to keep track of, just to, I don't know, to be prepared for all the different types of pronouns that there are, because you don't want to meet someone and be like, and maybe they use airs pronouns, and then it can be really hard and scary to feel like, oh, like I've heard of them, but like I don't know how to use them. And it's kind of one of those things where it's really important to just be more preventative than reactive, so we can make sure that all of our transgender and non-binary friends and family and coworkers are just feeling safe from the get-go, or just knowing that they at least have one person that just like understands, like, oh yeah, I've heard of those before, I can use them, boom, good to go. So that's really awesome. And then with the videos too, they are super good, kind of like synopses of everything we just went through in like 2 or 3 minutes. So if you know somebody who couldn't make it tonight, or if you kind of want to have a review session for yourself and you don't have time to watch the whole recording afterward, these are some good ones to look through and kind of just brush up on things. So, and these are some of the sources that we use because copyright. So, plagiarism, all that fun stuff. So these were just some of the articles. I wanted to link them in case anybody wanted to reach out later for me to send them to you if you wanted that. Yeah, mypronouns.org. I cannot plug that website enough. It's like, it's amazing. It's the first place I send people when they have no clue. And you know what? Actually, I have mypronouns.org on my email signature next to my pronouns because I know most people that I email aren't going to know why I have they, them under my name and my email signature. So
thanks for showing up, everyone. Now tell us how we did. So here's some directions for an online feedback form. Go to NEIPJC, the Northeast Iowa Peace and Justice Center.org. Scroll down and click on Pronoun Education Project. Scroll down and click on Virtual Pronouns 101 event. There will be a feedback form available, and we will also send a link, not a leak, to the feedback form in our follow-up email.
Yes, and I believe Charlene will be sharing a link to the feedback form in the chat right now if she hasn't already. So if you just want to click into that and take it right away. We would love your feedback. We would love, ways that we can improve this. We would love to hear about any future events we could do, and really, yeah, how can we make this more inclusive for everybody too? Because I know we are kind of running into some things with providing this on Zoom, which it's really nice that we can reach more people through Zoom, but we just still want to know, just be completely honest with us. Let us know what you think and what you want to learn more about. So also, yeah, this one's mine. Also, if you want to get involved, you can either put that on the feedback form. So make sure when you fill out the feedback form that you fill out your name and email so we can get in touch with you if you want to volunteer. Or you can email info@neipjc.org. Yeah, that's really important because shout out to our volunteers. There's Andrea Becker, and then and Ellis Arnold, and we got Charlene hosting. But the rest of them are my family members. And I know they love me, and I know they would do a lot for me, but I don't want to have to keep dragging them into into this. But thanks, fam. You're the best. Speaking of, thank you, everybody who helped make this event happen. We got to do all the specific shout outs. So Charlene with Peace and Justice Center, girl, I know I put you through a lot to make this event happen, but we did it, and it's amazing. And Charlene has just been such a huge support for me. When I first even brought this whole pronoun education idea to her, she was just like all for it. So thank you, thank you. Also, thank you to Ellis. They let us use they're like our tech person right now and making the Zoom magic work. And they also gave us a lot of knowledge on Zoom in general and how to make this function and how to make it all work. So thank you, Ellis. And then our lovely volunteers, we have Andrea. She's amazing. She's a part of our Pronoun Education Project. Thank you, Andrea. And then thank you to my family members. You know who you are. And I'll talk to y'all later. And then, and thank all of the people that came to show up and watch. We wouldn't have had this event even happen if nobody showed up. So thank you for showing up. Keep showing up. Don't stop. This fight for racial justice, this fight for equality, it's not over. So we hope this inspires you and encourages you to keep going and keep up the fight and all of that too. So, okay, awesome. Now it's time for your questions. And I just got a text that we do have a couple questions. So we did get done with presentation a little early at 7:43. We're doing good. So we do have plenty of time for questions. So don't hesitate if you haven't shared a question yet. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because we don't need it anymore. And we have people monitoring the Q&A. So Q&A people, bring forth the questions. Also, real quick, before we get started on that, you know, Rowan and I, like we said before, we can only speak to our individual experiences. So we are going to do the best we can to answer the questions, but I'm just going to lead with that.
Yep.
All right, we're ready for some questions.
Okay, the first one is kind of a two-parter, so, and this one might need some more research, but are drag queens also transgender, or are these separate things that sometimes coincide? So then part B, if they're not transgender, does their pronoun change when they're dressed up or down?
That's a really, really great question, and I actually asked that myself, even when I'm non-binary. So they're two separate things. They sometimes do coincide, as you said. And yes, there is often a pronoun change when they are dressed up. RuPaul actually said, a very famous drag queen, said it's like a transformation. It is changing from one thing to another. And some people see it as like it's more of a costume. So, but I think in the case of Marsha P. Johnson, it was, and for a lot of drag queens, they coincide. So it's both, but this being a drag queen is often more of a performance art than an actual identity. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, one thing I know about specifically Marsha P. Johnson was that she was kind of fluid between her identity as Marsha and her identity as Malcolm. So I think a lot of people obviously know her more as Marsha, but some, you know, I don't know. I remember reading something or watching, maybe it was with the Netflix documentary that, you know, one of the people that Marsha would see a lot throughout her time in New York, you know, he was like, yeah, one day she's Marsha and the next day she's Malcolm, you know, so it was kind of like she was pretty fluid with that. But it's one of those things where, you know, it can really depend on the person. So it's just important to ask and check in about it. Good question.
And there were a couple of questions that seemed to get cleared up on the chat, but just to clarify, one person asked, could you explain what GNC means? And an answer from the chat was gender nonconforming. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, gender nonconforming.
And then another one about the resources being available on the recording. Yes, all your links will be available. That was answered by Sharon. And then one more question just came up here. Do you have suggestions for navigating pronouns in the workplace, trying to be professional? Example, what if you're in a situation where you should address someone formally using Mr. or Mrs., but you haven't met them and don't know how they identify, both for in-person situations and communications via email?
Okay, so that's actually a great question. Usually it depends, obviously, read the room. Sometimes it's not a great place to ask, but for most cases, you would ask beforehand, like, oh, what are your pronouns when you are addressing them? If not, it's usually safe to use mix, MX, pronounced mix, which is gender neutral. That is the gender neutral Miss, Mrs., Mr. But it also just depends on the person.
Yeah, that's, but I also kind of want to speak more to, like, you know, pronouns in the professional setting and how, you know, there's a lot of workplaces. I'm sure so many people on this call, their workplace probably doesn't maybe emphasize pronouns. If it does, that's amazing. But, you know, pronouns can be an interesting thing to navigate in the workplace when, you know, you want to recognize people and their identities, but I don't know, some people might feel like there isn't a place for pronouns, so just really encouraging that with your leadership or administration or whoever is really important, because they might just not know why pronouns are important, and it can just really help, you know, like there's so many organizations or workplaces that, you know, are open to having people from diverse backgrounds apply or diverse gender identities apply, but they aren't going to have people, you know, transgender or non-binary people applying if they aren't making a space for pronouns. Most likely, because it is hard to find workplaces that are making that space. So it's just one of those things too, to kind of push for that in your own workplace and be an ally in that way, because it is hard to navigate professionally.
That's why I would encourage adding your pronouns to your email signature. If you know what that is, if you go into the settings of your email account, you can add a signature where it automatically signs your name. And then below that, you can put other things like even links like Maddie has, and you can put your pronouns. I put them in like little parentheses or like italics.
Yeah.
And it helps normalize it.
Yeah. And so then hopefully you can check people's email signatures when you first meet them, or, you know, for my work, I put them on my business cards. I have a name tag that I wear sometimes for work, like a magnetic name tag. So I also have like a pin with my pronouns on them that I can wear too. I kind of want to get a magnet one because my work shirts are nice and I don't want to poke them. But, you know, just some like other options of things that you can like have with you at work or wherever to kind of just display your own pronouns. So these are really good questions, y'all.
Here's another one. I've recently been seeing people writing 2 sets of pronouns at the same time, she, her, and they, them. I'm not sure where to go with this.
So that means that they're comfortable with either one. Usually that there are different terms for it. The one that I hear most often is demi girl or demi boy. Depends on the person once again. But sometimes people are comfortable with 1, 2, or any pronouns. They don't have a preference. So if you see 2 sets of pronouns, you can choose either one to refer to them as.
I'll share a little bit about my personal experience with this, because before I started using they, them exclusively, I was using she and they for a while, or yeah, just asking people to use she and they. But, and I don't really know how long that was. It was probably like a couple months, but you know, then I started to experience this frustration build up because people would still just use she for me anyway, which is fine because that's what I, you know, told them. But that was, you know, an indication to myself of like, okay, I don't identify with she, her anymore, and I need to let people know that I use they, them exclusively. But that's just something to keep in mind if people do give you 2 options, to maybe like, I don't know, somewhat use it as an opportunity for practice. So like if you do know somebody who's using she, her, and they, them, or he, him, and they, them, maybe just like using that as a time to practice using they, them for that person if you aren't, you know, if you don't feel like super comfortable with it yet, or you don't feel like you're super good at it yet, that might be a good opportunity for that. So just noticing that as well.
Have you done any research in terms of disability pronouns? Disability pronouns? I'm not sure what that means. Could you clarify?
Yeah. Do they mean, does the last, sorry, was that last question about? Neurodiverse
versus autistic. Neurodiverse versus autistic person versus person with autism. So I'm not sure if that has anything to do with personal pronouns specifically. Those are more terms. If you mean research between with gender identity and neurodiverse people, I can say that it's actually quite interesting because as a neurodivergent person myself, which means that someone with autism or some other sort of like, I'm not sure how to describe it, like ADHD, something that sets them apart from a neurotypical path. It's actually been shown that more neurodivergent people identify as non-binary, which goes with the theory that gender is a social construct, which
Hmm.
some people believe, some people don't. But that's a very, very common thing in cultural anthropology. And apparently more people with, for example, Asperger's or autism identify as non-binary because they don't have that same connection to social norms and social constructs, such as supposedly gender identity. So being assigned, when we're assigned, I was assigned female at birth, and I don't have that same connection with that social expectation the way that other people do. That might not have been what you meant. I'm sorry if it's not. I just went off on a completely unrelated tangent, if that's the case. Okay. In the world of disabilities, first-person language has been encouraged, i.e. person with autism versus autistic person. However, that may be changing.
Okay.
Okay, I see what you mean. So I haven't done any research personally into that. I've noticed it could be similar to the way that it's people of color rather than colored person, which is the racially charged version of that, the latter, the former. I haven't done any research into disabilities. I think either one for now would be fine, but I would do research into that yourself. I haven't looked into it.
Yeah, it's definitely something like we'll take into account for next time too, because, you know, there's definitely other things we can include in this presentation. So make sure when you're filling out the feedback form, you help us and give us some resources, or if you have your own set of knowledge that you can share with us and contribute, that's like, would be super, we would totally accept that as well.
Oh, I see. Okay, these preferences can vary from person to person, which is what I meant by disability pronoun. Normalizing a similar sharing of disability pronouns felt relevant. That, once again, yes, you're right, it does depend on the person. Some people don't feel comfortable sharing whether they're disabled to begin with. If it's someone who's like in a wheelchair, yeah, that might be, that would be more relevant, but as someone who isn't noticeably disabled, I can't speak for that, but yes, I will definitely put that in a feedback form because we're always looking for ways to be more inclusive. So that's definitely something we should look into. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. Any other questions, my Q&A gatherers?
You guys have been catching them all now, so.
They just
We're on top of
it. We talk too fast.
Any other questions? Like, y'all, this is an open space.
Brave
Any other
space.
questions you've always wanted to ask, or I don't know if like any other questions about us specifically?
Our own experiences.
Yeah, we're willing to share. So I'll give it a few, like a minute or two, if you want to type your little hearts away. And Charlene just shared the feedback form again, so make sure you fill that out. Any last ones? Okay. Any specific state/federal level government websites you'd recommend for gender identity work discrimination? Ooh.
That's a good question. I don't know of any. I would look into it. They haven't, like, for filing complaints or knowing your rights. Okay, that's a really good question. I feel like there is one. I think yes, there is. So I'm from Massachusetts, so it's hard for me to say, but there should be a state level websites. Let me look it up right now for you.
While Ron's doing that, I know in Decorah, Iowa, and maybe this is true, I'm sure this is true for other cities and towns, there's a Decorah Human Rights Commission, and that, I know that's one place where you can, you know, learn what your rights are and know your rights for like employers specifically, but also throughout the town. But then also probably you'd be able to file complaints there as well. I don't know if other people in Decorah that are watching right now know any other resources that they could share think, Shirley, yeah, or other people in Decorah could share other resources in the chat that they know, either in Decorah or Iowa overall.
Oh, so the one I found is the Iowa Civil Rights Commission, which is a government website. Yes, there is a link here for file a complaint. So, and they have another little tab that says your rights. So I think that would answer your question.
Yeah.
I'm glad I know that's here now. That's good to know.
Yeah, and somebody else just commented in the chat too. There's an Iowa Department of Human Rights as well. So these are just, Iowa examples. I'm sure if you're from Minnesota or elsewhere, you could kind of Google, and also One Iowa would be a good resource for the state of Iowa as well. Somebody else just commented. So yeah, as I say, do the Google.
Be savvy.
Do the Google or Joogle it. And HRC.org or Human Rights Campaign is a great resource for viewing laws and policies that affect the LGBTQ community. Yeah, thank you. That's Human Rights Campaign is a great website. That's where we got the data on the names of the transgender lives that have been lost so far in 2020. They have reports on that for every year, and then they also have a lot of other reports on that as well. So it's important to keep up with that. Okay, so Peace and Justice is a member of I'm guessing the Decorah Human Rights Commission, yeah. And they're developing a document and group to receive reports of bias incidents in our local community. So awesome, cool. That's really great. Any other questions? Y'all, this might be the one or few times you get to ask some non-binary people anything you want.
In case you want to take advantage of that.
I'm not trying to pressure you. I'm just saying, like, not everybody would, I don't know, be in the space to answer questions.
Yeah, don't worry.
My time checker is funny. All right. I don't know, should we call it?
Yeah, I think that was the last question.
All right. Well, if you have any other questions that come up after this, I know maybe you'll be processing it over the next few days and be like, oh my gosh, what about this, and that? You can fill out, if you hadn't filled out your feedback form, you can include your questions in there and we can try to get back to you. Or if you already filled out your feedback form, you can fill out another one if you want, or you can email info@neipjc.org with any follow-up questions. Hopefully, in the near future, Peace and Justice can keep bringing some follow-up content on our events, answering, specific questions too if they come up. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it.
It's been great.
I see so many people on this call that I know and love, so thank you for being here and for supporting. Yeah, have a great rest of your Sunday evening and happy Pride.
Yeah.
Ooh, let's ring it out with the jams. Where's the jams? Where are my jams? Where are my jams? Come on. Charlie. Oh my God.
Oh damn, I've been feeling something for you lately, and I am trying so hard to just stay cool.
Yeah.
I love this live stream.
Oh man, I think I might be going crazy.